So as someone who provides hands-on Autodesk Civil 3D training, how do you kind of ensure that the students not only learn the software, but they gain some of the practical skills that are needed to, understand civil engineering in the real world beyond those courses?
Well, I think let me just a couple points on what you just said. I think if you look at any of the highest levels of athletics, or if you look at our military, or if you look at any military, for that matter, the training and development is more or less the biggest part of their organization, given that somebody's going to have their own training.
Autodesk Civil 3D is a powerful tool that has revolutionized the field of civil engineering, enabling engineers to design, visualize, and simulate complex infrastructure projects with remarkable efficiency. However, its complexity can present challenges, especially for those new to the software. Effective training is the key to unlocking its full potential and enhancing design capabilities. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Andrew Kenyon. Andrew is a licensed professional engineer and a project manager at BGE. He's also the executive director of the Florida Civil Educators Foundation, or FCEF. He's going to talk about how he's bridging the gap by providing hands-on Civil 3D training to high school students, preparing them for the demands of the industry and inspiring the next generation of civil engineers. And he's also going to give you some tips on how you can master Civil 3D. My name is Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast. Now, I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Andrew Kenyon is a licensed professional engineer. He's also a project manager at BGE and executive director of the Florida Civil Educators Foundation, or FCEF. Andrew, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Anthony. Appreciate the time and the platform.
No, happy to have you. So maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of your career journey to date, how you got to your current role at BGE, and then we can talk a little bit about FCEF as well.
Yeah, of course. So I'm 27 right now. I graduated from the University of Florida in 2019. I've been working in the Jacksonville private land development industry since I graduated from UF. Going back a little bit further, I kind of got into civil engineering at the high school that I went to. So in St. Johns County, which is where I went to school, I wanted to go out of my zoned high school to go play baseball at a certain school, follow a coach basically. And they had a program where you had to apply and be accepted to these career academies, they called them. And so I kind of just selected, at the time it was called the Academy of Environmental and Urban Planning. And so I picked that one just because it seemed like it would be in my relative field of interest. I mean, at the time, as a freshman in high school, I didn't really know what I was interested in doing. But, over time in that class, I started to get, kind of exposed to AutoCAD and land development, the classes taught by, or was taught by Mr. Kevin Davenport. He's actually a co-founder of FCEF as well. But he's a former professional. He is still a professional engineer, but he had a private company that he started, was doing work as, and, basically sold the company after about 10 years and then went back and started teaching in this academy. So it was really cool to have that level of expertise in a public school. And over time, I just grew to really kind of had a math epiphany in high school, and that really started to be something that made sense and the science behind it. I also have some family in town that are general contractors. So I always knew that was a field that had a lot of demand and was a very tangible thing, and saw some success there. So, I kind of in high school contemplated maybe going the GC route, maybe going engineering. And Mr. Davenport gave me some wise advice that, if you're cut out for engineering in engineering school, you can theoretically go back and learn the GC stuff on the job. But it's a little harder to make the reverse move, just because of the education requirement. So ultimately, that was kind of what led me down the path of civil engineering. I wanted to go to the University of Florida, so that was the only school I applied to and the only school I got accepted to, which worked out pretty good. So, made my way through. While I was at UF at a career fair, I met a firm in Jacksonville called ETM. And so I started interning with them over the summer. I came back another summer and then actually interned with them part-time during my senior year through they have a pretty cool program called the Accelerator Program. So they actually opened an office in Gainesville just for hosting interns and keeping them in the loop and things like that. So I was able to really get some good experience. And then January 2020, I started full time in Florida, just as an EI is what we call them. That's the certificate.
Right.
Some other places will call them EITs, but so I was working in they're very, very big in the local market. They're very busy. And so I was doing a lot of large subdivision drainage projects, a lot of, pond modeling and things like that, a lot of permitting, working on some construction plans and things like that. And then about 2.5 years in, a little more than 2.5 years, I got an opportunity to come and start working for BGE. At the time, it was a new office in Jacksonville, so I left ETM and went to start work for BGE. They had about two people at the time in the local Jacksonville office, so it was a big change. BGE is they're a big firm. They're about 1,000 people. They're spread out in 6 states and 22 offices. So they're based out of Houston and Texas. That's where, kind of the bulk of the work is. And then I'm a part of the expansion into the Southeast, just to kind of, they're more or less diversifying their market and the geography that they can get work in. So
It
I'm a
was like
part
a
of
new thing. It was like when you joined, they were starting in the Southeast to try to build that up.
so they had the first office was 2017 in
Okay.
Charlotte, and then from there so right now we have Charlotte, Raleigh, Atlanta, and then Florida. And in Florida we have Jacksonville, Tampa, Sarasota, Vero Beach, and then we have a West Palm Beach office where our survey is directed out of. So
Wow. That's exciting, to join a company like that where it's growing and you can kind of be a part of that growth.
yeah, definitely. I mean, seeing it from, you know, I basically went from doing a lot of one particular thing to kind of wearing a lot of hats at once, which was, for my level of experience being, 6 years in now, roughly, including some of that intern time. You need all the experience you can get. It's definitely the most critical thing in development. So it was a great spot to be in. I was still, wasn't quite working on the scale of projects that I was, but was doing a lot more of the details of the ins and outs and closing things out and getting things, going out and doing some construction administration and things like that. And, ultimately while I was at ETN, that was kind of when I got the idea of starting FCEF. It was really just looking at the work we were doing and understanding that as consulting engineers, we really sell our time. That's it. And so, in order to create more revenue, in order to grow, you need more time and you need more hours to be able to produce those documents and send those invoices. So, I recognize that. I recognize that Creekside, that we had a good base of people that kept coming back every year, just that
Right.
public school doesn't go away. So it was one of those things where you kind of hear about the workforce problem a lot. And it didn't really make sense to me that there could be a problem when the population is growing. So, how could there be a lack of people when there are more people than there have ever been? So
Right.
to me, it was just a matter of how do we start to pull that resource and pipeline that resource, to our industry. And so that was kind of where I got the idea for FCEF.
Right. And just so everyone knows, again, let me say it again. It's called the Florida Civil Educators Foundation, or FCEF. So it sounds like there was some inspiration there because you saw the challenge firsthand of the workforce. We have more work than we can do right now in civil engineering in a lot of areas across the country. And most firms can't hire fast enough, right, to get enough people to do the work. And it's a problem. And it sounds like this is one of what you were hoping to help solve with the problem, and then connect younger youth, kind of like your experience in high school, right? Where you got
Exactly.
connected with someone and trying to bring them into industry. So talk a little bit about your plan and how things are going and what it looks like.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of going back to what you said, this kind of sounds a little bit tacky, but I remember at my middle school, there were these signs that kind of hung down in the middle of the hallways and had all these inspirational quotes on it and stuff. And one of the ones that really stick out was "Be the change you want to see in the world," And so it was, especially because I had that much access to, a program like that. Mr. Davenport, like I said, he was all on board and has been supporting the whole time, recognizes, as a former, consulting engineer, he recognizes the value that having a pipeline is. And so, he was on board. And, the main goal right now and where we're at is really just trying to, number one, get in the classrooms and do hands-on training. And especially in the St. Johns County area where we teach in right now, it's all subdivisions. And so we start with just a subdivision project, laying out, a cross section and doing some lock rating and being able to help, high schoolers, juniors, and seniors start to understand what civil engineering is, because it's as exposed as it is to me. Like, I can't drive down any road and not look at every drainage inlet, or drive down 95 and not look at the culverts and things like that. But that's just because I've been doing this for as long
Right.
as I have, and that's like
Yeah.
what I kind of live and breathe. But until you really show a high schooler that, they don't know. So, I think that has always been the main goal, has been to, obviously training is kind of the vehicle that we use, but ultimately we want to be able to kind of, just be the pipeline. There already are existing pipelines, but, big picture is just trying to foster talent, to develop talent, and then to help that talent get out into the field and go from being, you know, even pre-entry level, like high school level, to, I mean, I think when you look big picture, and what I see in my head, when I envision this is 5, 6 years down the line, if I have a high school intern every year, then in 5 years, I'm going to be able to pull a EI out of that pool every year that's got 5 years of experience working for me or working in the industry. And it's a much different hiring picture than just, maybe hoping you get lucky, or finding somebody who's in a position they're, not happy in, or something like that. It's a really sustainable pipeline.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. 100%.
and then I think if we can get everybody on board and understanding it, understanding the goal, what we're doing. If you just look at, every public high school in Florida and every university or technical school in Florida, if you pulled one person out of those pools into the industry, you know, that number gets pretty big pretty fast. Especially, and then when you start to think about, the prior experience they have and some preliminary training, that curve gets pretty flat in terms of, or maybe not pretty flat, but it gets flatter, than it was previously. And I think, as consulting engineers who sell our time in the studio, we can get to production, the easier it is to sell that to other people, and to show them that there is value in this.
That's great. No, I think it's great what you're doing. In fact, it's interesting. I wrote an article a couple of years ago. The Tampa Rays down there, the Major League Baseball team. I noticed that they were having like crazy success every year with like the lowest payroll in the league, or one of the lowest pay. Like, from an engineer who does a lot of math, it doesn't make sense that a team every year is in the top 10% of wins and the lowest 10% of payroll. Like, there's something there, type of thing. So
Yeah.
I ended up reading like about 100 articles, and I put together this summary article. And one of the things that they did really well was recruiting and development of like younger talent. And what they did was they went like into South America and some areas where they noticed were really good ball players. They would establish like free clinics by the Tampa Rays, and that really helped them to scout and develop, which again is very similar to kind of the company you mentioned earlier, where they're doing stuff on college campuses, and like, kind of also what you guys are doing, like getting out there just for the industry doing it. But my point being is that I think really one of the solutions to this workforce challenge for us is companies have to develop people from a young age, like you're saying. Get a top elite internship program going, bring them back year after year, develop them, because that's the only way you're going to be able to grow. Because you can't find these mid-level managers out there where you could just hire them. And the other thing that I'll say about what you're doing, which I really like, is my mom is a math teacher. And I remember years ago, she asked me to come in. It was like an engineering day or something. So she asked me to come in. And I'm also at a background in private development. So I just bought I brought a simple piece of paper in for each kid. And I had like a building, a parking lot. And I had them like just lay it out. These were probably like fifth graders, sixth graders.
Yeah.
And they loved it. They were like trying to put the building, the parking spaces. So you're like taking it to the next level with high school, where you're able to do like maybe CAD and some subdivisions. And I think that's the thing about civil engineering, is if people see it, even kids, they're like, wow, this is really cool. And I think that will stick with them. And, I know a lot of people say we got to get to kids at a younger age, but I think even in high school, I mean, I have a daughter who's in college, and she didn't figure out what she was doing until high school. So I think high school is a very good age for people still to see these things, because they're still trying to figure out what they're doing. And I think the easiest way to sell civil engineering is to let people do it, right? Get them on the
Yeah.
programs, which is exactly what you guys are doing. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I know you do some training on like Autodesk, let's say Civil 3D. So as someone who provides hands-on Autodesk Civil 3D training, how do you kind of ensure that the students not only learn the software, but they gain some of the practical skills that are needed to, understand civil engineering in the real world beyond those courses?
Yeah. So, well, I think let me just a couple points on what you just said. I think what you just said about recruiting and the raise. I think if you look at any of the highest levels of athletics, or if you look at our military, or if you look at any military, for that matter, the training and development is more or less the biggest part of the of their organization. And so I think
Absolutely.
sometimes it's in business, it's not always, a given that somebody's going to have their own training or their own development or their own pipeline. And so that was something that always kind of stuck with me. I mean, I played sports growing up. I was never, at a level like that, but that was something that stuck out to me. It was kind of, a lot of people have some sort of pipelines and some sort of recruiting, but having a formal development pipeline, is a little bit different. But going back to the next question, we try to start from the ground up. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I always have for anybody is, like you said, to do it. We're not splitting atoms here, and that's not to downplay what we are doing, but we're doing a lot of point slope formula at the end of the day. So we kind of break it down from the very base level. We start talking about setbacks, and we start talking about zoning. And like I said, at least at Creekside, the school that is kind of our main home base right now, everybody lives in a subdivision. So we start with a subdivision. We start with the cross section of a road. What does it mean to have a grades in a lot? Where does the water go? What is, how do they make pipes flow a certain direction? Gravity and stormwater. How do we get, we kind of start with the basics. We go through and basically do a full, and it's not a full, it's a very intro, but a production set of drawings. So we do a corridor surface, create a proposed grade surface. We do the, feature line grading, and then we kind of tie it back into coming up with a kind of a final product, like a more or less like a contract document that we would produce day to day. And so that's just like an 11 by 17 plan set that kind of has their subdivision. It's graded, it's labeled with spot elevations and contour labels and flow arrows and stuff. And then we, pretty much that's the end of our training. And from there, the next biggest goal, because we will train people who aren't necessarily interested. That's half of it is having people recognize this is something they don't want to do, which is just as important, especially when you're at that age. But for the people who really find that they like it and it meshes with their system, and who they are, we try to place them with all of our local supporting companies. So any of the companies that we have, who basically give us sponsor dollars. So we're a formal state nonprofit, so we're registered with the state of Florida, and then we have our IRS 501c3 exemption as well. So, we're
So it's a donation for these companies.
correct. I mean, it's right as of now. It's a donation. It's a sponsorship. We usually kind of have like donuts or something there to kind of help Pavlov dogs in a little bit. Like give them
Right.
something to keep it coming back, and just if we can, it's easy enough to. And so using those sponsor dollars for things like our actual administration of the business, there are some things to just keep compliant, but really those people that go out of their way to invest with us, we try to make sure that we're investing back with them. That's the whole point. And I think really making sure that the students that we have get real training and hands-on understanding of things is to get them in the field, right? And I think the best way to do that is to grow those relationships with the companies that we have and build new ones, and try to create more positions for the students to get in the field and to have a summer in the office, because that's where everything's made. That's where we're trying to teach them from the ground up how to make the sausage, in a way. And so it's one of those things that even if we don't necessarily place them, we still think that with the training that we're teaching them, they do grasp the understanding of what civil engineering is, when they look at curbs and when they look at curb ramps and inlets and things like that. But at the end of the day, just having them be able to understand the software and understand how a contour is created, understand, how a pipe flows, things like that. That's really kind of at the end of the day, what we look at is not success or failure, but if the stuff that we're doing is coming across to them and they're understanding it.
Yeah, no, it's really important. I mean, I think And I think you hit it there where you said, letting people kind of see what civil engineering is. Because I think like a kid today, okay, you'll hear people say like, I want to get into coding or gaming. They know what it is. They play video games their whole life, right?
Yep.
They don't know what civil engineering is other than what they hear you say it is. And so for them to see the program and to be able to do something on it and then maybe go out in the field and see it is that they need to see that. And I think it's really hard for a profession to get people into it if they don't know what it is. And that's why I think groups like your group, what you're doing is so important because I think civil engineering is a really attractive profession from a demand supply in terms of jobs that are going to be out there for the coming years and the kind of stuff you're doing, which is really cool. I mean, you mentioned it before. I've actually written an article on this myself about how you see the world as a civil engineer. Like I was on a vacation in Spain and I was looking at all the drainage stuff to see how
Yeah.
different it was, So
Yep.
it really is an interesting, it brings you interesting aspects at work and just in your personal life as well. And so I think it's great that you're doing that. I want to dive a little bit more into Autodesk Civil 3D because I know it's something that practicing civil engineers who listen to this show deal with and have to train on themselves and train people in their organizations. What would you say are some of the most common challenges that civil engineers face when they're learning Autodesk Civil 3D? And how do you recommend maybe overcoming some of those?
Yeah, great question. Civil 3D is, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's the hammer that we use every day as a tool. It's the shovel or the bulldozer or however you want to analogize it. When we're hired by a private company or whomever to help them get their project going, they're hiring us to get them a permit, right? They're not necessarily hiring us for a set of plans. I mean, they need a set of plans, but they want the permit because they want that asset or whatever. And Autodesk Civil 3D is the tool, the software tool that we use to create, to go from a 2D boundary survey, layering in the 3D element of the topography, and then creating a site design, with all these other regulatory agencies and things like that involved. But when we create our construction plans, Autodesk Civil 3D is the software that we use to create the contours, create the line work, to create the pipes, and to design the site. And I think the biggest thing with Civil 3D that tends to put people off is that it's a lot of information. It's a lot at once, and I think it can get very overwhelming very fast, especially when you have these certain functions and you have to click this and then click that, and if you miss this click, then you got to go all the. It's one of those that and ultimately it's also one of those programs where 20% of the functions do 80% of the work. And those are the ones that you use every day. So, but there's also an element of just analysis paralysis when you get in there of just so much at once. I
So
think
focusing on those 20% would be a great way to start and to help with that
correct,
overwhelm, I would imagine.
correct, and that's really what we do through our FCEF training. So the first session that we do, like we've talked about, is basically a subdivision design, and we start with the 2D drafting of the line work. Then we layer in the element of some of the Civil 3D stuff, which is the corridor modeling and the sections and the sub-assemblies and profiles and things like that. When we're able to have a class, so usually our ideal class size is about 30 students or so with 2 instructors. And it's, people definitely get lost. I mean, it's hard not to sometimes. So that's one of the things. But starting at a total base level, walking them through. I mean, having hands-on help is different than having a write-up or a tutorial or a video. Having somebody who can be there, like, no, click that, go to here, like this is where you do that from. It's That's where I think we really kind of you know separate ourselves in the training that we can do. And so, even though it is everything at the end of the day is complex. I mean, at whatever level you do, whether you're an accountant or an attorney or whatever, like when you get to that level, it gets complex. But at its base, everything starts, like addition and then subtraction and then multiplication, and then eventually you get to calculus. So we're trying to start with the elementary aspects of Civil 3D just to not scare them away from it. And I think
Mhm.
once you get into that and you realize that, yeah, we're doing point sub formula, and once we get everything set up, things tend to kind of, it does make sense, and it is not easy, but it's understandable. And I think once you get to that point, then it starts to become more like almost like a computer game.
Yeah.
And not to be like flippant about it, but it's just the ability that you have to be creative and to solve a problem is unlike, at least from where I can, from my experience, it's unlike anything else I've done. Every project is a prototype, and every project is a one-off in a way. Having strong foundation of the skills, and then getting them excited about it, and then having them advance on it. I think that's just the natural progression. And the only advance, you're going to do that anyways if you go to work for a private development company. I think what helps us is, we don't obviously have the pressure of trying to meet a deadline, or the pressure to try to be utilized at a certain rate, or whatever it is. So when we can get in the door for free with these high school students who have to be in school no matter what, it's just kind of a different level of being able to like really connect with them and really make sure that they understand the material.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that's just a general, really good strategy and approach for learning anything in your career, right? Like figuring out the 20%, that's going to drive 80% of your success in that field of whatever it is. Like if you want to learn a new language, I'm sure like 20% of the words are used 80% of the time. Learn that part of the vocabulary first, then you can get you going, right? It's the same thing like we're talking about here with Civil 3D. So that's a great strategy. I think for those of you out there trying to do anything and accomplish anything in your careers, and I'm sure it can apply with the programs that you are learning. So I want to ask you a little bit about, we have listeners, Andrew, all over the country, right? Not just in Florida, all over the country. So how can civil engineers collaborate with educational institutions to support training programs like FCEF? And what benefits might they experience from partnerships like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll at least start with Florida. I know, and I can't remember the exact, legislative act or whatever, but at some point in Florida's history, they enacted basically that if you're a public school and you wanted public funding, that you would, you had to have some sort of a STEM program. And so I think, especially if you're in Florida, if you start to look around at different websites for public high schools, they almost all have a STEM program, and a lot of them have some sort of drafting associated with it. And so I'm not sure if that's exactly the same across the country, but if I had to guess, I would say that
Yeah, I
most
think
of
it
them
is. I think
probably
they're big
do.
on STEM funding like everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think, one, identify the programs, right? I think you got to know where your local pools are and where you can pull from. I think you gotta make those relationships with the people at the schools or the institutions, universities. We're also partnered with UNF right now, our local university, to deliver the same lessons to students who are getting their civil engineering degrees. So it's, kind of helping us take the next step, if you will.
Wow.
But I think, number one, identify the schools, and then I think you got to get involved, and it can't just be a flippant, here's $5,000, and put my name on something, or here's some donuts. I think the biggest thing, and I would argue that your time is more valuable than your money when it comes to investing in some of those programs. And I know that can kind of be the difficulty and the challenge, is getting some of your staff, out into the field during a, normal office hour, when there's, ideally, kind of producing. Those are the people that need to be teaching. Those are the people that need to be bringing the next generation into it. I mean, that's when my first boss at ETM, and I'm still, very, very close with. He was at my wedding a couple weeks ago. He was the same way. He was somebody who was very in the weeds of production, and he was able to really, really train me. And so I think that's kind of what I'm trying to emulate a little bit, maybe on a different scale, is, being in that. So I think, you gotta find the institutions, you gotta partner with them wholeheartedly. If you're a business that has, the money to invest, I would say invest. But I think even more importantly than that, invest your time.
Yeah.
So whether it's going in and doing a presentation and just, hey, here's what we do, here's civil engineering. I think that's a great start. There's also other groups out there. So like there's a big foundation called ACE, Architecture, Construction, and
Yes.
Engineering. There's other companies like that. They're national. They have a huge following.
Yeah. ACE has a huge national mentoring program that's
Yep.
really, really, really well received, and you can get involved with that. And I think the big takeaway really, Andrew, is, to your point, is yes, there's a level of sponsorship from a monetary standpoint where you can donate, and a lot of firms do that, and that's great. And and organizations like yours need the money to do what you're doing, but at the same time, you need people that are going to get out there, roll up their sleeves, and do the work, and teach
Yep.
kids, train kids, get in front of the classroom. And so that's I would say part of the challenge of this, because like you said earlier, most of the private companies do expect their engineers to be highly utilized. So going out and getting out and going to schools isn't always maybe something that is that easy to do. But there are also companies that are, I think, a little more visionary, saying if we don't do this now, we're going to run out of people. And so you kind of have a healthy combination. But
Uh,
I would emphasize the idea of investing time, because you need the money, but you need the time as well.
Yeah, and I think if you're, if you're a company that at least is growth focused, you have a 5-year goal. And so if you're thinking 5 years in the head for your business in terms of revenue and whatnot, then why would you not be willing to kind of dedicate that same energy to developing the talent that you need to get to those goals?
Absolutely.
I think I think it's just such a critical, at least in what we do, being into a technical profession. I mean, it's hard to just have somebody who's not necessarily in the industry just pick it up, and so I think that's like I said, just investing time wholeheartedly, and then if you have if it seems like something that's worthwhile enough, I think beginning a program like our model is basically going in the morning, 1 hour before school, and doing that about 8 times in a semester. So like it's 8 hours of manpower that you kind of dedicate, but in the ideally you're getting 8 1-hour interviews with 30 students, right? And
Yeah.
so
Right.
that's a lot different than going to a career fair and getting resumes or whatnot. You're spending time with those students for an hour each time, and so you start to pick up like who's really interested in it, who's really grasping the concepts, who's not just here for the donuts, and I think once you can kind of sort that out, okay, who am I willing to put my neck out on the line for and get in the office, because
Get an
it's
internship going.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a small thing for a company to welcome a high schooler into their doors. I mean, businesses are the way people feed their families, and when you have huge businesses and companies, it's not nothing to have somebody come in, but at the same time, I think if you're really, about it, then it pays for itself, many times over once you get down the line. It's just a matter of kind of dipping your toes in the water and then jumping in.
Absolutely. What would you say are some of the skills that you're seeing that they're taking away from these courses that are going to be helpful in their careers? What are some of the skills you see that they're picking up?
I think one of the, just taking high level, the biggest skill that I see is understanding that what they're doing in school does have an application. I think and maybe in engineering we're spoiled because I mean, my job is my whole entire college, education is what I do every day, and then I went and did it, and then I took the PE exam, right? And then I'm still doing that every day. So I think and I'm very grateful for that, but I don't really think I started to see that click until I got into work, and I think, like I said, point slope formula is what I keep going back to, but showing them that, like, yeah, calculus is real. Like, you got to calculate volumes of earthwork. And so you need to go from proposed grade to existing grade. And obviously, we don't do that math on paper. But that's what Civil 3D does. But, they got to have that understanding. And so, having the skills of that, having a skill in the software can lead to a very, very good income and a very nice, career. And I think it's also one of those careers where if you have an entrepreneurial itch, this is one of the places to do it. I mean, so just having a skill that nobody can take away from you that has value. But I think at kind of at least from the high school standpoint, it's about, does civil engineering make sense for you? Is this something you'd be interested in? Because we are competing with computer science, IT.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
when we go to career fairs, for every 10 computer science or IT resume that, comes up, we get one civil engineering major. And it's, that's what we're trying to kind of compete with. And so I think, just understanding that there's a real world application to the stuff that they're doing. And especially when it's like civil engineering, it's very public, it's very out in the open, and understanding that that's a, career path. I mean, the skills of AutoCAD and things like that are not secondary to it. They're just all a part of it, and they're just as important. But I think it's really about kind of understanding the basics of what is civil engineering, and then getting into some of the details too, because the details are kind of where it gets fun.
Yeah. And I think what you said about a high school student understanding how what they're learning can apply to like a job that can really earn them a living is important distinction that they can't really make on their own because they don't know what's out there that they can connect these skills to. So I think that's got to be a big part of motivating them, for their careers, which I think which is awesome.
Yeah.
So Andrew, what has been the most rewarding outcome of your work with FCEF so far, just personally?
I mean, there's been a few things. It's been rewarding to have, the support of the industry, to have other companies that we write proposals against for the same jobs that are willing to, recognize the value and, kind of approaching this as an industry. That's super rewarding to kind of see that come together. I think being able to mentor somebody at that, like at a high school age, and to be able to say, hey, here's what I do and make it look cool, and then basically have them follow that path. I think that's because I'm not too far removed from them. I mean, I'm about 10 years from having graduated high school, but that's in the scheme of things, that's pretty close, and they can relate to me. I can relate to them. And, I have a few former interns who are now working for other companies, who have gone and interned with them and they've done so out of demand, and they've done so because they're valued. And so I think being able to, have kind of the same mentoring impact that's been given to me, being able to put that out in the world too has been, beyond the selfish things, like being able to I've learned a lot more about Civil 3D having done this. I think teaching is the highest form of learning. It's funny you say your mom's a math teacher. My mom was a kindergarten teacher, and now she's a literacy coach
Oh, wow.
at a school. And so I've always kind of had, approach things through, doing it once, and then how is it taught to me that I would like it taught better, or how could this have been clarified? And so I think for me, selfishly, I've been able to really understand Civil 3D a lot better, understand how to teach it to people in a classroom, because that transfers into when we have a new staff member that comes on our team. I'm able to get them on board a lot faster. I think personally, my career has definitely taken a big step once I went from just producing work to producing work and trying to produce people that could produce work. I think that's where my career has really seen the biggest, and it's only about 6 years in, but that's where I've kind of seen the biggest, exponential growth has been once I, obviously I had to get comfortable with the things that I was doing to get to that point. But once I was able to really contribute to other people's success, it has done a lot more for me,
That's great. That's awesome. All right. So what we're going to do is take a quick break. We're going to finish up with Andrew by giving him a couple of career questions on our hot seat. And then when we wrap up, we'll tell you, a little bit more about FCEF and how you can help out, especially if you're local to the area there. So we'll be back in just a minute with our hot seat segment. All right, we're back with our guest, Andrew Kenyon. Andrew's a licensed professional engineer, project manager at BGE, and also executive director of the Florida Civil Educators Foundation. So, Andrew, we've heard a lot about the good work you're doing. Now we want to just hit you with a couple of last career-related questions on our hot seat. Ready to go?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, so I want you to think back on the managers that you've had so far in your career. You don't necessarily have to name names if you don't want, but what I want to know is, maybe think of one of your favorite managers and what was it that made he or she your favorite? And the reason we ask this question is we're trying to understand what makes really great managers and leaders in civil engineering, and wanted to see what your take on that is so far in your career.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't mind naming names. I got great relationships with him, but my boss at ETI, his name's Danny Welch. He was the one I was talking about earlier. He was super instrumental in my original growth and really kind of the way I approach engineering now. He was still in the weeds. He was still, producing, and I was, basically his, I like to think of it like an apprentice, I mean, I was really getting a lot of the, the important stuff and helping. And then as my career changed, as I transitioned to BGE, my boss now, Jenny, she's a little bit more of a hands-off boss. And given that I'm kind of managing my own jobs, it's for communication's sake, it's kind of best to have that one path. And so it's been really instrumental in that, because she gives me tons of opportunity, and she lets me make a mistake, and she lets me correct it. And she, all those things that to me make a difference. I think, different parts of your career, I think you need different things in terms of mentorship and things like that. But just in general, I always like to try and think I'm trying to emulate all of the best things about all of my bosses and the way that I try to mentor my staff. And, I think at the end of the day, it's just, metering things out, right? Like not starting with, hey, produce a whole plan set, but let's start with a set of storm tabulations and then we'll move forward to some drafting and then, trying to give short leashes and trying to make sure they grasp it and that they're not just floundering and uncomfortable. I think, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, but at the same time, when you're starting out, you got to have some support, and so to me, in the early stages of your career, I think, experience compounds like money does. And so time in the market beats time in the market.
Yeah.
And so I think the earliest you can get in there and try to learn the weeds of things from people who really know what they're talking about, the better off you're going to be, because it's tough to manage things that you don't understand. And so I think the sooner you can get that understanding, the better. And so that's why, if I had any advice to people looking for mentors, it's try to find people who, have that past history of being in the weeds and doing the work that you're doing or will be doing, because you want to start off confident. You don't want to be like the rookie first round draft pick who goes in and, throws 48 interceptions and never wants to play football again. So
Yeah.
I think there's an element of that to it. But yeah, and I think just treat people the way you want to be treated. I think both of my bosses have been very good about that, and they've recognized my efforts and they've made me feel appreciated. And I think those are some of the obviously the non-tangible things, but just I think at the end of the day, just treat people the way you want to be treated, and try to get people to your level so that you can pawn your stuff off on them and move up to the next.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this idea that you're suggesting of being allowing your team members to be hands-on, right? Practicing things, making mistakes, and then helping them correct them is a really good approach, especially in civil engineering, because the only way, like you said, to learn is you have to do it. And I would imagine that that's also why with some of the courses you're teaching, like you said, you're getting better at Civil 3D and you're learning more about it because you're teaching it, you're hands-on with it more, you're explaining it to people. So I think that's an absolutely a big part of being a great leader in civil engineering. You got to let people try things, you got to let them put them out there, and then you got to help them and coach them along.
Yeah,
And it's great
definitely.
to hear that. All right, the last question I'm going to ask you here is, we call it the civil engineering career elevator advice question. So if you got into an elevator with a civil engineering student, let's say, or someone who's ready to start their career in civil engineering, you had 30 to 40 seconds with that person, what advice would you share with them based on your career so far?
Yeah, based on my career so far, it would be find something that you like and learn it and really understand it and really start to be comfortable with it. And then move on to the next thing, and start to, I think as a civil engineer, land development, being a generalist has been a huge value to me. So being able to do utility design, being able to do grading, being able to do earthwork estimations and drainage and permitting and all of that. I think for me, it was get good at something and really start to, submit your value as an engineer. And then from there, I would say, don't be afraid to take a risk and don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Try to be uncomfortable when you're in situations that are healthy. Like don't be afraid to not take on that utility design because you've never done it. Be willing to to go out there and to work and to do something different. And I think ultimately, if you're at a company that you know really supports you, then you're going to get every opportunity that you need. I think, especially in this, it's a good time to be graduating in civil engineering and to be in the field. There's a lot of federal dollars and private dollars that are being spent, and demand is definitely there. So I think, become a technical professional and really be comfortable with that. And then I would say start to learn how to develop other technical professionals, because like we've talked about, it's really about the time that you can bring to the table, and without burning out and without having it be a miserable you know lifestyle. It's about developing yourself. Do I feel confident and comfortable doing what I'm doing, and then how do I develop others to be in that same kind of position? I think that's the best advice that I would have. It's gonna, to me, at least if you're in kind of the technical world, it's only going to benefit you to be able to understand it and then to be able to teach others how to do it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I totally agree. It's like learn one thing really well and then move on to the next thing. And I think in civil engineering, when you become very well-rounded, it's very beneficial for you in your career and for your company. Like you said, you know how to do a lot of different stuff and you've gotten pretty good at it, and then you can teach other people. And I think clients want that, firms want that, right? They want people that are well-rounded. And it sounds like that approach would help with that for sure.
Yeah.
So,
And in the same vein, I would just say too, understand it's okay to not know it all. It's okay to say, I don't know the answer, but I'll find it. Or, I haven't done this before, but somebody at the firm has, and we'll get you an answer. There's an element of understanding that it's okay to not know everything too. So
yeah, which is important in civil engineering when you're standing in front of a public board or, a group of citizens.
yeah, or
And,
the
you can't,
funders or something like that, yeah.
you can't, you don't just want to say an answer because you don't want to, because you don't have an answer, because it can really come back to bite you and your organization. So building up the confidence to say, hey, listen, it's a great question. We've got great professionals in our office that can answer it. So let me pull together the right information and get it back to you. But,
Yeah.
I know it's easier said than done, but
Yeah.
it's certainly something that
Definitely.
you need to think about. So, Andrew, before we let you go, just for those that are interested in learning a little bit more about the foundation and what you're up to, whether they're in Florida or whether they're somewhere else and they want to try to do something like it, where can they find out about it and read about what you're doing?
So we have a website. It's www.fcefinc.com. It's like I said, we're kind of at a bit of a grassroots, still kind of growing. That's where our main website is. I would say that our LinkedIn is probably our most up to date in terms of where we are, who we're teaching, what we're doing. That's probably the best place and where we get the most value out of posting things. And then in terms of contact, most of it has just been direct contact through me. So either, my work email, akenyon@bgeinc.com is what I've been using to just, kind of coordinate a lot of the stuff and things like that. And my cell phone. I mean, I'm open to any and all.
We'll put links to all the stuff in
Yeah.
in the episode and make sure that everyone can get connected with you and see what you're doing, because I think it's great. And I think that it's needed. The only way to solve the workforce challenge in civil engineering is to get to the youth and help them see what a great industry it is and make them really understand it in a hands-on way, like we've spoken about today, which is exactly what you guys are doing, which I think is awesome. So
Yeah.
thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for talking through some of the things you're doing, and thanks for doing it. Just as a civil engineer myself, I appreciate the work you guys are putting in to try to, continue to make sure that this industry can be, thriving in terms of the work that we're able to accomplish. So,
Yeah, of course.
once again, Andrew Kenyon. Andrew, thanks so much for being on the Civil Engineering
Thanks,
Podcast.
Anthony. Really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Andrew. He's doing some awesome things by educating future civil engineers, also mastering Civil 3D himself, and he's offered some great tips here on how you can do the same and really how you can get engaged in your community and build that next generation of civil engineers, which I think is super inspiring. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.